Henry Moore is without doubt the world's greatest living sculptor. Historically, he ranks in the leading sculptors of all time. His mastery is acknowledged throughout the world. Now in his 83rd year, Moore has returned to the Carrara Mountains where the marble for many of his carvings has been quarried. The same marble that once was manhandled down the steep mountainside by Michelangelo, the man whose name first awoke in Moore a desire to be a sculptor. Italy, and Florence in particular, has had a seminal influence on Moore. In 1924, as a young student, he spent his first traveling scholarship here. This city claims more great works of art within its walls than any other city in the world, and it became an obsession for the young Henry Moore.
Hello. Ah. Very to see you.
In the nearby town of Crocetta, craftsmen work to Moore's specifications. It's a labor of love for both artist and artisan.
Very nice.
Ora abbiamo lasciato
I know the little
questo per trasporto.
Sì, sì. For transport.
Eventualmente
cut off in London.
I know, yes.
50 years ago, the first major exhibition of Henry Moore's sculpture was held in the Leicester Galleries in London. The art critic of the Morning Post described Moore's work as immoral and Bolshevik. He said it was a scandal that such a man should be teaching young students at the Royal College of Art. This year there will be major exhibitions of his work in Spain and Portugal, and further exhibitions are already being planned for America and Mexico. There is hardly a capital city that has not staged an exhibition of his work. They're on public view and in private collections on every continent. In his career, Moore has created around 700 different sculptures, from small maquettes a few inches high to pieces of monumental proportion. Through the activities of the Henry Moore Foundation and the new sculpture centre being built at the City Art Gallery in Leeds, it's planned to make his work accessible to everyone and to provide one of the world's leading sculpture centres for students. A few miles from Leeds stands Castleford, the small mining town where Moore was born in 1898. And it was in the closed terraced streets of the town, rising and falling from the pits, that young Henry Spencer Moore spent most of his childhood.
I think a person's landscape when young, even it's amongst towns and so on, I think has an indelible influence, certainly on artists. I think one's early 10, 20 years, maybe the most important. It marks you for life. The shape of the land that you live in, the skies that change and it gives people an attitude to life that is indelible. I can't imagine Turner being born in France. I can't imagine, of course one can't imagine Constable living anywhere or being brought up anywhere in. But I can't imagine Michelangelo being born in Germany and not in Italy. All that is tremendously important, of course. Yorkshire is something that one can't get away from. One doesn't want to get away from it. But unless you leave a place, unless you go and know something different, you don't know what it is. Something that is very strongly a part of my life and upbringing is the influence that both my mother and father had on me. I can't imagine what I'd be like if those influences hadn't been there. But how can one imagine what anybody would be like without their parents? I mean, if a child, we know that there have been examples of children abandoned when they're one or some that age, and animals having brought them up. And what they do, they grunt and go around on all fours. I mean, without your parents, without influences from other from grown-ups, children would do, they'd be animals. So we learn, all of us learn from, first of all, from our parents and then from everything around us. And this is what sculptors and painters and everything, we learn from the past and from people of the past, from history. My mother had 8 children, of which I was the 7th, and all housed in this little 4-roomed house. But I never felt any deprivation or any lack of room, of space. My mother was marvelous. When I think of the amount of work that she must have done in her life, physical work, it's just staggering. My father, for a period, did work in a coal mine. And I can remember, I mean, she would have to get him off on night shifts, and he'd be back in the early morning and so on. She'd be up, the family got off to school. She worked from morning till night. My father was a typical Victorian, not bully, but controller of the family. I mean, he was the boss, absolutely. My mother just... she knew sometimes, I mean, he used to threaten if he didn't like his tea to throw it on fire back. And she'd just let him do it. And say, no, she was marvelous. She just lived for her husband and the family. And nothing else was of any importance. My father really was a wonderful man. By the time I went to grammar school, he could help me with my trigonometry, with my algebra, with whatever it was. That he seemed to know the whole of Shakespeare and so on, and yet he'd left school at 9, but he taught himself by books, and perhaps, I mean, he was the influence, or might have been, the one that really pinpointed my ambition. No, he was a wonderful man. Had he had a tenth of the opportunities and the chances that he gave his family, then he would have really been a very remarkable man. For people like my father, who wanted his family not to have the struggle that he'd had, was for the children to pass the exam to get into the local grammar school. I had to take it twice. It made me, the first time I failed it, because at the same time he was having me do lessons on the violin, which I hated, because the noise I made was so dreadful. But I got out of the violin and took the exam again and passed. But this is the kind of father that he was. He was trying to give to his children a much, much better chance than ever he had had. And I think he said to my mother, toward the end, when he was still ill, he was still worried about his children. And I think he'd been going through with her all of them. And when it came to me, he said, "Henry will be all right." Sunday afternoons, our parents sent me to the local congregational Sunday school. And there the superintendent of the Sunday school always gave a little homily, a little lecture, a little sermon in a childlike way, which always had a moral, always had some. And this Sunday, that I remember so clearly, he was talking, I think the moral was that children should always listen to what they're being suggested or told, to any advice that they may get. And then he told the story that Michelangelo, the greatest sculptor that ever lived, was carving the head of a laughing faun in his studio in Florence. And his studio was like a garage is nowadays, open to the street. And a passerby stopped to watch Michelangelo working on this, which was nearly finished. And after watching for about 5 minutes, Michelangelo was used to this, people stopping and looking. The watcher, the man, said to Michelangelo, "Hey, wouldn't an old faun have lost some of his teeth?" And he said, "Michelangelo, listen to this man, perfect stranger." And he realized that what he was saying had some sense in it. And he took his chisel and hammer and knocked 2 of the teeth out. I said, and there, said the superintendent, was the greatest sculptor that ever lived, listening to a perfect stranger. And so children, whenever anybody gives you advice, do listen carefully. You're not above learning from anyone. If the greatest sculptor that ever lived can take something from a perfect stranger because he realizes it had sense in it, you must always listen to what. Now, what stuck in my mind was not the moral of this story at all. It was that there was somebody called Michelangelo, the greatest sculptor that ever lived. From then onwards, I clicked in my mind. And when anybody said, "Henry, what do you intend to be?" I didn't say a tram driver or whatever it was. I said, "I want to be a sculptor." The only real bit of sculpture that I saw were the heads, the Gothic heads on Methley Church, which was where my grandmother lived in Methley, and I used to go as a boy to visit her, past the church. My parents didn't go to church much, but they were believers very much. I was confirmed, and I remember that one was so moved by the occasion that walking down the aisle to go and have the First Communion, I was walking 1 foot above the ground the whole way. I was on air. Castleford is an intensely industrialised town within a couple of miles of the centre, outwards. But get 2.5 to 3 miles outside Castleford and you're in marvellous country. Marvellous, I mean, Ledsham and those parts, especially in my youth. Well, I was a very average boy that enjoyed sports. And yet, I did want to learn. I wanted to be good. I wanted to be top of the class if I could. I was an average but physical boy, and that's what one should be. I was in the cricket, in the first cricket team, and in the football team. I played right wing in football. And I met the other day in Castleford when we did I met the person that was a very good, used to be Ambler, Frank Ambler, whose father used to keep the Keel Inn in Castleford. And he reminded me when we were in Castleford just now, he said, do you remember you used to play right wing and I was playing centre forward? I used to get very cross that you were too far ahead, and so on. He remembered it all. One had fights as children. Sometimes you'd say, I'll fight you with my hand tied behind your waist. And you'd have your hand with a scarf or so on, and you'd fight one-handed. I remember elementary school boys stopping me on the way back from grammar school and a buck patch of them and threatening, and I had to fight them. I'd say, but that's what boys must be. I mean, that's the... anyhow, that's what Yorkshire boys had to be. My father took me to Admiral Rock. I can't remember how we got there or what and why. It was then a very bare, solitary, large rock sticking up for no reason whatever. I mean, there weren't any other rocks around it, and you wonder why. And I think, perhaps, that I must have been about 10, that is what's made me like, or triggered off one's liking for these solitary rocks that one sees sometimes off the seashore. And this is, I think, that perhaps these single rocks, like people giving them a name, the old woman or whatever it is, they find some meaning in. That this is one of the primitive appeals of sculpture. One often was alone, but it didn't mean... I mean, when you went bird nesting, you'd go alone. When you went... oh, now and then, yes, one... I remember playing truant from school and going to Pontefract races, which I had probably only 9 or 10, because I remember having to look at the horses racing through a man's legs on the ground. I mean, because I couldn't have seen standing up. I got away with that. There was one time that I didn't, because I fell in some water and I had to hide the fact that all my underclothes were wet by putting them under the bed at night. My mother found them. My mother, from as far back as I can remember, being the 7th child, she must have been in her 50s when my childhood memories start. And I know that from then until she died at 84, she suffered from rheumatism. But what embarrassed me really was having to rub my mother's back. I was about 6 or 7. But now I can do backs because rubbing her back, the soft part of the buttocks, the soft part on the shoulders, the boniness down the middle of the back, the shoulder blades and so on. And from doing this, perhaps, what, 40 or 50 times in my, from when I was 6 or 7 until I was 8 or 9. I can do backs very easily. Every morning in the grammar school, secondary school, we stood in rows of houses. Girls' houses in front and the boys' houses, red, white and blue at the back. The girls were Darlings, Nightingales, Brontes and so on. I was in the front row, the blue house, and therefore I had all the girls' 3 houses in front. And I could see the back row very easily, and the others too. But they were in gym dresses, which come just above the knee. And in the morning, every morning for nearly 6 years, standing there looking at girls' legs, I could identify any girl in the school if it would have shown me her legs from the knee, just above the knee downwards. Anyone, I could have said, there you are, that's Kathy Smith, that's Phyllis Jones. Now this, of course, is again a sign of one's interest in 3 dimensions, in form. Saturday nights, we used to walk up and down the main street, passing girls that were walking in 2s and so on. And after doing this for about 12 weeks running, you might actually say hello to the girl that you picked out as being the one that you thought was, you thought was good looking or nice and you liked it. And after another 3 or 4 weeks, you might even date this girl. There has been, as a mixed grammar school, one did have chances to date girls a bit. And I remember all the ones that one gradually sweet on. That was a very important. I believe in mixed schools from those days on. But there was a girl and she walked, I thought, so marvellously. I would watch, I'd go parts where she couldn't see me and watch her walk and so on. when that song came, she walks like an angel walks, or she talks like that one. It made me remember this one, this kind of thing. As boys, we used to go and watch the local butcher killing, as he used to do, I think, on a Wednesday or whatever day, a certain day of the week. This was a sight which is, I must have seen from the age of 6 or 7. Just the boys' local viewing. But we watched it as though it were, I don't know what, oh, I suppose like people watch bullfights. You didn't think of the moral of the animal or anything like that. Of course you didn't. You can't at 9 or 10, you don't know. Especially if it's generally practiced all around. They're taught one something about life. In fact, everything. You see, a sculptor is dealing with reality. If you make to believe something without experiencing it, then it's unreal. I mean, just like children should know what being hurt is. If I fall on their knees, I went round as a little boy with permanent scabs on my knees because of falling in the hard asphalt playground. I think that one's got to know everything that you can. As a little boy, in the wintertime we played town games, but in the summertime we played country games. And I loved that, and I think I was very lucky to have a mixture of the both intensified, the country life, and yet in the wintertime playing Levy-I-O, marbles, chalk and ringy. But there was one game that we liked. We played it as piggy, which was one shaped a piece of branch of a tree, the ideal diameter of which might be a piece that was 1 inch in diameter and about 4 inches long. One sharpened the 2 ends of this 4-inch stick, and with your stick that was your bat, as it were, you had to hit one end, and being at an angle, it would jump. And it would jump a certain height, and then you had with your stick to hit it as far as you could, and then give the boy that you were playing against a number of jumps in which to do the distance you'd hit it. To make the piggy, or to make a piggy that would jump, was really the main part of the game. And I loved carving, even from that age. And I became very good at making piggies that would jump. And so I was often asked to make piggies for them. And this may be one of the reasons for a bit of the enjoyment of carving wood. Guessing the number of strides that it could be done in, and then giving a little lower than that, made you judge distances. Now, judging distances and judging space is just as difficult or as necessary to be able to do in sculpture, because it's the same thing. Castleford was famous for its pottery. I mean, Castleford ware, because there's some very good clay for pottery making around Castleford, and there are several potteries, and one could get clay from there and make these touch ovens, I think we call them, in which you made a little square box of clay, only about 4 inches, but with the tops, all the sides, and a hole in one side, and a little chimney in the middle. And you went collecting from the dead wood of trees, wood that we called touchwood, which was so light, and which, if it began burning at one end would go on glimmering or glowing until it wouldn't flame because it didn't have enough kind of body. It lost it. It's like setting light to cotton wool in a way. And this was a game, and I used to love making the touch ovens and decorating them sometimes. So all those games, all those were introductions to using your hands and making objects, which is what sculpture is compared with painting or drawing, which is only illustrating something. Sculpture is reality. Even in the elementary school, I knew I liked the drawing lesson, which came on the Friday afternoons, the last half hour when the teacher was tired and the children were all longing for the weekend, was the drawing lesson, half an hour. And I don't know what one drew, sometimes a cube or a cylinder or whatever it may be. But I knew that I looked forward to that, not because it was the end of the week, but because it was the drawing lesson. So when I got to grammar school, again, the art teacher became very important to me because the art lesson was what I liked and what I knew I liked. And she was marvellous. She picked out 3 of us in my form, all of whom were more interested in the lesson than the average one, because the average pupils, the drawing lesson was just a play lesson. It wasn't, they didn't take it seriously or so on. And often they played tricks on poor Miss Gostick. They would bring mice in their pockets into the room and let them out. And she would be frightened. All this, they would play tricks against. I mean, the art lesson was the one that, and she couldn't keep discipline. She wasn't that type. And in fact, I mean, her lesson was supposed to be one that you liked to do, not because of... Anyhow, there were 3 of us in this form who vied with each other for her favours in giving jobs, giving tasks which needed a little ability in that direction. The war came in 1914. I was still at grammar school. By 1916, several old boys from the grammar school had been wounded or killed. And there was the time to begin a kind of roll of honour of the school. And Alice Gostick decided that she would have one made, and she chose me to do the carving. She left it to me to do a design of putting 1914 with a dash to 19, whatever it was. And that was my first real use of proper, not a penknife to carve wood, but of proper gouges and chisels and so on. And this probably gave me a further impetus towards being a sculptor. The 1914 war, people were so patriotic, I mean, it was unbelievable how many people volunteered in those days very quickly. I mean, too many all the time. And I remember the Form 2 teacher was a conscientious objector. I admired him very much, and he helped me in my drawing. He gave me little jobs to do because he realised that one had a bit of natural talent for drawing. I remember him opening his book one morning and a white feather falling out because some of the students were calling him a coward because he was a conscientious objector, in which he needed infinitely more courage not to join up with this conscience in those days than ever anybody following the general trend of everybody else and joining up. I admired him enormously, and it only leads me on to saying that in my life, apart from one's parents, teachers have been the biggest influence of all. My mother, I remember her coming when she was around 80 to the cottage that we had down in Kent. to spend a week or two with us. And she sat out in the garden on a kind of summer's day, and I was carving. And after about half an hour or more of watching, she saw me hitting this hard stone. She said, "Henry, lad, why ever did you pick that job?" Meaning that to her, one's whole elevation was to get away from physical labor. But what people often don't know is that, someone like Michelangelo worked physically harder and longer per day than any coal miner's ever worked. And I worked harder and longer when I wanted to do a carving than any coal miner has worked. And perhaps one gets that physical side from one's mother as much as from one's father. I'd hate to have the same kind of childhood that a lot of my friends, whom I've had as friends since, who were sent at 4 and 5 to boarding school, away from their home, crying their eyes out for the first week. I'm glad I didn't have that kind of, very, very glad that I had a complete, warm, integrated family, a big family too. I don't want any of that changed. I'm amazed sometimes when I think of what things I tackled and did without finding or thinking that they were going to be difficult. And thank goodness one did have a nature like that anything seemed possible.